A father slapped a poor virgin for being broken. Snow fell silent as the church bell rang, and every soul in that small mountain town turned away. Shamed, she ran barefoot into the storm, praying for death before dawn. But an hour later, 3 mountain men rode down from the ridge, men who carried more scars than bullets, bound by faith, guilt, and a mission of mercy. When they found her half frozen in the snow, the world shifted. Because the secret she carried, the deed to the valley's only spring, could save 100 orphaned children or destroy the town that condemned her. Whispers spread. The sheriff raised his badge. Her father reached for his rifle, and the snow-covered pass became a battleground for truth, redemption, and blood. In a land where shame kills faster than winter, can one broken girl and 3 weary men bring living water back to a dying valley? Or will the same hands that struck her once strike again? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The bitter Colorado wind howled through the foothills, whipping snow into stinging clouds as Ella Darnell stood before the congregation of the little whitewashed church. Her heart hammered against her ribs while whispers slithered through the pews like serpents. The rough floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she shifted, trying to steady herself against the waves of judgment washing over her. "You broken liar!" Maverick Darnell's voice cracked like thunder in the hushed sanctuary. Her father's weathered face, carved deep with lines from years of drought and disappointment, twisted with fury. His eyes, usually the warm brown of freshly tilled earth, had gone hard as winter frost. The congregation drew a collective breath as Maverick's calloused hand struck Ella's cheek. The force of the blow sent her stumbling backward, her fingers clutching the worn wooden pew for balance. The sting spread across her face like wildfire, but the burning in her heart hurt far worse. Through tear-blurred vision, she saw Eldon Haskett rise from his seat in the front row. The preacher's son stood tall and proud in his Sunday best, his carefully combed hair and pressed collar a stark contrast to the dirt under her father's fingernails. Ella's last thread of hope withered as she watched Eldon's lips curl into a practiced frown of disapproval. "I cannot take her hand in marriage," Eldon announced, his voice carrying clear and cold through the church. "She is not pure." The words fell like stones in still water, rippling through the congregation. Women clutched their shawls tighter, drawing children close as if her supposed sin might be catching. Men looked away, some shaking their heads in disgust, others studying their boots to avoid meeting her desperate gaze. "Please," Ella whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was begging Eldon, her father, or the Lord himself. "It isn't true." But truth had no place here, not when Eldon's lies had already taken root in fertile soil of gossip and spite. Her father's hand rose again, and this time when it fell, the crack of skin on skin echoed off the whitewashed walls like a gunshot. Ella's feet carried her backward of their own accord. Her torn shawl slipped from her shoulders as she turned and fled, pushing through the heavy wooden doors into the swirling snow. The bitter cold bit at her bare arms, but she couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. The church bell began to toll noon, each resonant strike marking another step in her desperate flight. She ran past the general store where she'd once traded eggs for penny candy, past the smithy where she'd watched her father's plow being mended last spring, past the schoolhouse where she'd taught the younger children their letters when the regular teacher had fallen ill. Every familiar landmark now seemed to mock her with memories of a life that had shattered like ice in a spring thaw. The snow grew deeper as she left the town behind, soaking through her thin dress and numbing her bare feet. Still, she pressed on, leaving the well-worn paths for the wild trails that wound through the foothills. The wind howled louder here, drowning out even the sound of her own ragged breathing. "Lord," she prayed between gasping breaths, "if it please you, let me die before I must see another cruel face." The words frosted in the air before being swept away by the relentless wind. Her feet, now bloody from sharp rocks hidden beneath the snow, carried her onward as the gray afternoon light began to fade. As dusk approached, the storm grew fiercer. The familiar shapes of pine and boulder transformed into looming shadows. Ella's steps became increasingly unsteady, her body trembling with cold and exhaustion. Her mind began to wander, filled with fragments of memory. Her mother's gentle hands braiding her hair, the smell of fresh-baked bread in the kitchen, the warm light of the lamp as she read from her mother's Bible in the evening. The memories blurred together like the swirling snow around her. Her throat burned with each breath, and her prayer became a whispered litany. "Please, Lord, please." She wasn't sure anymore what she was asking for: death, mercy, or simply an end to the pain that seemed to fill every corner of her being. The last rays of daylight were fading when her legs finally gave way. Ella collapsed onto the snow-covered trail, her breath coming in short, hitching gasps like a child's after long crying. The bitter cold had worked its way deep into her bones, and even shivering required more strength than she could muster. The snow continued to fall, delicate flakes settling on her eyelashes and melting against her tear-stained cheeks. As consciousness began to slip away, her last prayer faded into the gathering darkness, carried away by the winter wind that moaned through the trees like a mourner's lament. She lay there, a crumpled figure, in a torn dress, while the snow began to cover her like a burial shroud. The marks of her father's anger still blazed red against her pale skin, but the cold was slowly numbing even that pain. Above her, the clouds parted briefly, revealing a single star shining in the darkening sky, a distant point of light in a world that had become nothing but shadow and ice. The day's events played through her mind in disjointed fragments. The rustle of Sunday clothes in the pews, the sharp crack of her father's hand, Eldon's smooth voice pronouncing her shame, the tolling of the church bell marking each moment of her disgrace. Each memory stung anew, but the pain was growing distant, muffled by the soft blanket of snow and the creeping numbness that promised relief from all hurts. As consciousness slipped further away, Ella's thoughts turned to her mother, gone these 5 years past. Perhaps, she thought dimly, she would see her again soon. The thought brought a strange comfort as the world grew darker and more distant, the howling wind becoming nothing more than a lullaby singing her to sleep. The snow continued to fall as night claimed the mountain, covering all signs of Ella's passage, save for a single trail of footprints that grew fainter with each passing moment. The church bell's toll had long since faded, leaving only the whisper of wind and the soft hush of falling snow to mark the passing of this dark Sabbath day. The storm unleashed its full fury as 3 riders made their way down from the high ridge. Their horses picked careful paths through deepening snow, steam rising from their flanks in the bitter cold. Behind them, a pack mule plodded steadily, its load of blankets and salt pork secured against the weather. Ephraim Holt led the way, his broad shoulders hunched against the wind. His quiet eyes scanned the trail ahead, reading signs that most men would miss. The Cherokee blood in his veins had taught him to watch for the smallest details: a bent branch, a shadow out of place, anything that might spell the difference between life and death in these mountains. Behind him, Jonas Pike pulled his coat tighter, muttering a prayer under his breath. The circuit preacher's silver hair peeked out from beneath his snow-crusted hat. His weathered face creased with concern. "Storm's getting worse," he called out, voice nearly lost in the howling wind. Owen MacLeod brought up the rear, one hand resting near his rifle. The former cavalry sergeant's sharp eyes constantly swept their surroundings, old habits from war days dying hard. "Need to find shelter soon?" he growled, "or we'll be feeding the coyotes ourselves instead of those orphans." Ephraim raised his hand suddenly, pulling his horse to a stop. His eyes fixed on something near a snow-laden spruce. "There," he said softly, pointing to a dark shape half buried in white. "Something's not right." The three men dismounted, their boots crunching in the fresh powder. As they drew closer, the shape resolved into a human form, a young woman in a torn dress, her skin nearly as pale as the snow around her. "Sweet Jesus," Jonas breathed, dropping to his knees beside her. He pressed gentle fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. "She's alive, but barely." Owen was already pulling blankets from the pack mule, his movements quick and efficient. "Need to get her warm, fast. Ephraim, can you clear that space under the spruce? We'll need shelter from this wind." Ephraim nodded, moving with quiet purpose. His strong hands broke away snow-laden branches, creating a protected hollow beneath the ancient tree. Years of experience in the mountains had taught them all how to make camp swiftly when lives hung in the balance. They worked together seamlessly, each man knowing his role without need for discussion. Owen dug a shallow pit for fire, while Jonas carefully wrapped the unconscious woman in layers of wool blankets. Ephraim gathered dry wood from beneath fallen logs, using his hunting knife to strip away wet bark and expose the dry heart of the branches. Within minutes, a small fire burned in the shelter of the spruce. They heated stones in the flames, then wrapped them in leather and tucked them around their frozen charge. Her breathing, shallow and irregular, created small clouds in the frigid air. "Look at her face," Jonas said quietly, gesturing to the angry red marks on her cheek. "Someone struck her. Hard." Ephraim's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He'd seen enough violence in his life to recognize its handiwork. Instead, he focused on warming more stones, his movements careful and deliberate. Owen kept watch through the long night, his military training evident in his alertness despite the exhaustion they all felt. Jonas dozed fitfully, waking often to check on their patient. Ephraim remained awake, tending the fire and replacing cooled stones with hot ones, his dark eyes reflecting the dancing flames. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky in pale colors, the young woman stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to fear as she realized she wasn't alone. She tried to sit up, panic evident in every movement. "Easy now," Ephraim said softly, keeping his distance. His voice was gentle, like he was calming a spooked horse. "You're safe here. No one's going to harm you." She pressed herself against the trunk of the spruce, clutching the blankets around her. Who are you?" Her voice was barely more than a whisper, rough from cold and fear. Jonas moved slowly into her line of sight, making sure to keep his hands where she could see them. "I'm Jonas Pike, a circuit preacher. These are my friends, Ephraim Holt and Owen MacLeod. We found you in the snow last night. You were nearly frozen through." The young woman's eyes darted between them, like a rabbit seeking escape. Are you taking me back?" The terror in her voice was painful to hear. "Back where, miss?" Owen asked, his usually gruff tone softened with concern. She swallowed hard. "To town. To my father." Ephraim shook his head slowly. "We're not taking you anywhere you don't want to go." He reached for the coffee pot, warming by the fire, pouring a cup and offering it to her with steady hands. "You're free to choose your own path." She accepted the cup cautiously, her fingers trembling slightly. The warmth seemed to give her courage. "I'm Ella," she said after a moment. "Ella Darnell." Jonas nodded encouragingly. "We're headed to the orphan mission in Crystal Valley, Miss Darnell. Bringing supplies before winter cuts off the passes completely." He gestured to the pack mule. "Those children will go hungry if we don't get through, and thirsty too if we can't find a solution to the spring running dry." Ella's brow furrowed. "The spring is dry? But that valley always had good water." She took another sip of coffee, some color returning to her cheeks. "My mother used to tell me about a spring there. She said—" She paused, as if sorting through memories. "She said she had a deed to it before she passed." The three men exchanged significant looks. Owen leaned forward slightly. "Your mother owned water rights in Crystal Valley?" "I think so." Ella's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "She kept the paper in her Bible, said it might be important someday. Father never knew about it. She told me to keep it secret." Her eyes darkened at the mention of her father. Jonas stroked his chin thoughtfully. "A deed to a spring could mean life or death for those orphans, Miss Darnell. The mission's well has gone brackish, and the creek's too low to trust." Ephraim added another log to the fire, his movements deliberate as he spoke. "No one would force you, but if you knew where to find such a deed." He let the thought hang in the air, careful not to pressure her. Ella stared into her coffee cup for a long moment. "The Bible's still in my room, hidden under a loose floorboard." She looked up, meeting their eyes one by one. "But I can't go back there? Not after—" Her hand touched her cheek unconsciously. "You wouldn't have to," Ephraim assured her quietly. "Just tell us where to look. We can find a way." Owen shifted, his hand moving to his rifle out of habit. "Though we'd need to move soon, before this storm blocks the passes completely." Ella wrapped the blankets tighter around herself, seeming to draw strength from their warmth. The first rays of morning sun filtered through the spruce boughs, catching the frost in her hair like a crown of tiny diamonds. For a long moment she was silent, weighing choices that would change more lives than just her own. Dawn painted the snowfields in gentle shades of pink and gold, the pristine white taking on the warmth of morning like nature's blush. Ella sat wrapped in borrowed blankets near the dying embers of their fire, her hands curled around a tin cup of fresh coffee. The morning light revealed what darkness had hidden, the deep purple bruising along her cheek where her father's hand had struck. "Miss Darnell," Jonas said gently, settling himself on a fallen log nearby. "Sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter to bear. Would you tell us what brought you out into that storm?" Ella's fingers tightened around her cup. The coffee's warmth seemed to give her strength, and after a long moment, she spoke. "Eldon Haskett, the preacher's son, he—" Her voice caught, but she forced herself to continue. "He spread rumors about me, said I'd been improper with him. But it wasn't true. I never—" Tears spilled down her cheeks. Owen's weathered face darkened with anger. He muttered something under his breath about men who don't deserve daughters, as he aggressively stoked the fire. "Father believed him," Ella continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "In front of the whole congregation, Eldon refused my hand, said I wasn't pure enough to wed a preacher's son. And Father—" She touched her bruised cheek. "He called me a broken liar and struck me, twice. I couldn't bear their stares, their whispers. I just ran." Jonas bowed his head, his lips moving in silent prayer. After a moment, he looked up, his eyes kind but fierce. "Truth doesn't melt just because the world's gone cold, child. God knows what really happened, and his judgment matters more than any man's." Ephraim had remained silent throughout her story, but now he moved from his position at the fire's edge. His quiet presence seemed to fill the small camp as he spoke. "Miss Darnell, perhaps there's purpose in our meeting that goes beyond chance. We're bound for the orphan colony near Red Willow Creek. They're dying of thirst. Their well's gone bad, and the creek's too low to trust." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We'd heard tell of a wronged girl who might own rights to a spring that could save them. Seems God may have led us straight to you." Ella's eyes widened as understanding dawned. The spring deed in Mother's Bible. She twisted the blanket between her fingers. "But Father, if he knew I'd gone back for it." "Your father won't know," Owen said firmly. "We can fetch that Bible without him being any the wiser." "Those children need water, Miss Darnell," Jonas added softly. "And maybe you need a purpose bigger than the pain you're carrying." Ella sat very still, watching the last wisps of smoke curl up from the fire. The morning sun caught in her hair, turning the frost there to diamonds. Finally, she straightened her shoulders. "Mother always said that spring was meant for blessing others. I reckon she'd want it used to save children." Relief washed over the men's faces. Ephraim nodded once, approval clear in his dark eyes. "Then we'd best get moving before this storm closes the passes completely." They broke camp with efficient movements, each man knowing his task without need for discussion. Owen secured the packs, while Jonas doused the fire properly. Ephraim disappeared briefly into the trees, returning with a piece of old buffalo hide he'd stored in his saddlebags. "Can't have you walking in those torn shoes," he said, kneeling beside Ella. With skilled hands, he fashioned the hide into rough but serviceable boots, lacing them carefully around her feet. "These will keep you warm until we can find better." Ella touched the crude boots with wonder. "Thank you," she whispered, and something in her voice suggested she meant more than just the shoes. By midday, they were ready to move out. Owen helped Ella mount behind him on his sturdy bay, while Ephraim led the pack mule and Jonas rode point. As they started down the ridge, their horses' hooves broke fresh trails in the snow. Ella found herself watching Ephraim's straight back as he walked ahead, leading the mule with sure hands. There was something comforting about his quiet strength, so different from her father's harsh authority or Eldon's smooth words. When he'd fashioned those boots for her, his gentle care had brought tears to her eyes, not of pain this time, but of gratitude. The snow-laden branches swayed gently overhead as they picked their way down the slope. Despite her fear, despite the uncertainty ahead, Ella felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. These three men, the quiet blacksmith, the praying preacher, and the gruff veteran, had been sent to her in her darkest hour. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps God had a purpose in all of this. Jonas's voice drifted back from the front of their small procession, humming an old hymn about God's faithful provision. The familiar tune settled around Ella like a warm shawl, and she found herself humming along softly as they made their way toward whatever lay ahead. Their tracks stretched behind them in the fresh snow, not the desperate flight of a shamed girl anymore, but the steady progress of people with purpose. Each hoofprint marked another step toward hope, toward redemption, toward a spring that might save more than just thirsty children. The mountain trails narrowed to treacherous ribbons of white as the small party made their way through the peaks. Wind howled between the crags, carrying stinging pellets of snow that bit at any exposed skin. Owen MacLeod rode point, his broad shoulders hunched against the cold as he cleared fallen branches from their path with practiced efficiency. "Watch your step there," he called back, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "Trail's getting mighty narrow." Ella clung to the pack mule's worn leather saddle, her borrowed boots secure in the makeshift stirrups Ephraim had fashioned from rope. The gentle beast picked its way carefully through the snow, guided by Ephraim's steady hand on the lead rope. His presence beside her offered silent reassurance whenever the path grew especially precarious. "Lean forward just a touch when we go uphill," Ephraim instructed quietly, demonstrating the motion with his free hand. "And back when we're heading down. The mule knows these trails, but you've got to move with him." Ella nodded, mimicking his movements. Her muscles ached from the unfamiliar posture, but she found herself slowly adapting to the rhythm of mountain travel. The borrowed clothes from Jonas's pack, thick wool and sturdy cotton, kept the worst of the cold at bay, though nothing could fully block the bitter wind. Jonas rode behind them, occasionally humming hymns that drifted forward on the breeze. His voice provided a strange comfort against the mountain's wild sounds, the crack of snow-laden branches, the moan of wind through stone, the distant cry of winter birds. As darkness began to creep up from the valleys, Owen raised his hand, signaling a halt. "There's a good overhang just ahead," he called back. "We'll shelter there for the night." The rock outcropping jutted from the mountainside like a giant's curved hand, creating a natural shelter deep enough to protect them from the wind and snow. Owen and Ephraim worked together to clear the space, while Jonas gathered dry wood from beneath nearby fallen trees, where it had stayed protected from the wet. Soon, a small fire crackled in the shelter of the rock, its light dancing against the stone walls. Ella sat close to its warmth, wrapped in blankets, watching as the men moved about their evening tasks with practiced ease. Owen tended the horses, Ephraim prepared a simple meal of salt pork and beans, and Jonas knelt in the snow, his lips moving in silent prayer. When they had eaten, Jonas settled himself near the fire, his weathered Bible open on his knee. The firelight caught the silver in his hair as he looked up at their small group. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've always believed that God counts steps through snow as prayers if walked in faith." His finger traced along a passage. "Like David's Psalms of Ascent, climbing mountains while lifting praise." Ella hugged her knees to her chest, remembering countless Sunday services where she'd sat straight-backed in her best dress, her father's stern presence beside her. This felt different, holy in a way she couldn't quite explain. "My mother," she started, then paused, gathering courage. "My mother used to sing 'Come Thou Fount' when she was worried or afraid. Said it reminded her that God's grace flows like water, even in dry times." The men watched quietly as she drew a shaky breath and began to sing, her voice barely above a whisper at first. "Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace, streams of mercy never ceasing call for songs of loudest praise." The familiar words echoed against the stone, growing stronger with each verse. When she finished, silence fell over their small camp, broken only by the crack and pop of burning wood. Owen stared into the fire, his usual gruffness softened by memory. Jonas wiped discreetly at his eyes. Ephraim sat perfectly still, his face unreadable in the flickering light. "Your mother taught you well," Jonas said finally, his voice gentle. "Both the song and the truth in it." They slept that night, wrapped in blankets and buffalo robes, the fire banking low but steady against the cold. Ella drifted off to the sound of wind in the pines and the occasional stamp of horses' hooves, strange music that somehow felt like safety. The next 2 days passed in similar fashion, each hour bringing them closer to the valley below. The storm's fury gradually lessened, though the wind remained sharp enough to steal breath. Ella's confidence grew with each mile, her body learning the ways of mountain travel under Ephraim's quiet guidance. On the third morning, the clouds finally broke, revealing a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The sun transformed the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling expanse of white and silver. As they rounded a bend in the trail, Owen pulled his horse up short and pointed. "There's Red Willow," he said, gesturing to where a thin column of smoke rose from the valley below, marking the settlement's location against the pristine snow. Ella shielded her eyes, trying to make out details of the town that might become her sanctuary or her next trial. The smoke seemed impossibly distant, yet somehow too close. Ephraim moved closer to her mule, his voice pitched low so only she could hear. "Best you know now, town gossip travels faster than wind in these parts. Folks will have questions about a young woman arriving with 3 mountain men." "What should I tell them?" Ella asked, anxiety tightening her throat. "The truth," he replied simply, "but only to those who deserve to hear it. Your story belongs to you, Miss Darnell. No one else has rights to it without earning your trust first." Jonas urged his horse forward to join them. "The mission house will welcome you without question. Martha, my sister, she's got a way of knowing who needs shelter and who needs answers. She'll help you find your feet." Owen grunted agreement from his position on point. "Aye, and any fool who tries to spread tales will answer to us." His hand rested meaningfully on his rifle stock, though his expression suggested he meant more than just physical protection. Ella straightened in her saddle, drawing strength from their quiet support. These 3 men, strangers just days ago, had shown her more genuine kindness than she'd known in years. Whatever waited in Red Willow, she would face it knowing she wasn't alone. The trail wound down toward the valley, each switchback bringing the settlement into clearer view. Smoke rose from more chimneys now, and Ella could make out the shapes of buildings: a church spire, a cluster of cabins, larger structures that might be stores or stables. Somewhere in that town were thirsty children waiting for the hope that spring water would bring. Her mother's deed weighed heavy in her thoughts, tucked safely in Jonas's Bible for the journey ahead. They still had to retrieve it from her father's house, a challenge she tried not to dwell on. For now she focused on each step of their descent, each careful placement of the mule's hooves, each breath of sharp mountain air that filled her lungs with something that felt remarkably like freedom. The sun climbed higher as they picked their way down, casting their shadows long across the snow. Wind sighed through the pines, carrying the promise of valley warmth to come. Ella found herself humming her mother's hymn again, softly at first, then with growing strength as the others joined in, Owen's deep bass, Jonas's clear tenor, and Ephraim's gentle harmony weaving together in the mountain air. The mission house rose before them, a weathered 2-story structure with half-finished walls on its western side. Rough-cut timber lay stacked nearby, waiting for warmer days and stronger hands. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, carrying the promise of warmth within. As they approached, the front door burst open. A dozen children spilled out into the snow, their excited shouts carrying across the yard. They swarmed around Jonas's horse, small faces upturned with joy despite the visible weariness in their frames. "Preacher Pike! Preacher Pike!" they called out, some coughing between words. "Did you bring medicine? Did you find water?" A tall woman emerged from the doorway, her gray-streaked hair pulled back severely from a face that matched Jonas's kind eyes. Martha Pike carried herself with the bearing of someone used to making order from chaos, though exhaustion showed in the shadows beneath her eyes. "Children, give them room to dismount," she called out, her voice firm but gentle. The young ones stepped back, forming a ragged line. Ella noticed how some wore clothes too thin for the weather, and many showed signs of mixed heritage in their features: Cherokee, Ute, and other nations blended with settler blood. Ephraim helped Ella down from her mule, his strong hands steady at her waist. She stumbled slightly, legs stiff from days of riding, and he caught her elbow. "Thank you," she murmured, conscious of Martha Pike's assessing gaze upon them. "Jonas," Martha stepped forward to embrace her brother. "We've been praying for your return." She turned to Ella, her expression warming. "And you must be Miss Darnell. Welcome to Bitter Springs Mission." Inside, the main room served as both classroom and dining hall, with rough-hewn benches and tables pushed to the walls. A fire blazed in the hearth, but couldn't quite chase the chill from the corners. Children huddled near the warmth, some reading from worn primers, others mending clothes with careful stitches. Martha led them to the kitchen, where empty barrels lined one wall. "Our water situation grows dire," she explained, running a hand along a barrel's cracked rim. "The creek bed froze weeks ago, and what little we can melt isn't enough for so many." Through the kitchen window, Ella could see the creek bed Martha mentioned, a ribbon of ice and stone snaking behind the mission. The sight stirred memories of another creek, one that had flowed sweet and clear through her childhood. "Show her the rest," Jonas urged softly. Martha nodded, leading them to a small storage room. More barrels stood empty, and dried herbs hung from the rafters, meant for medicines they couldn't make without water. In one corner, a young boy curled on a pallet, his breathing labored. "Timothy's fever won't break," Martha explained, her voice tight. "Without clean water for willowbark tea." She left the sentence unfinished. Ella's heart clenched. She thought of her mother's spring, how it had never frozen, even in the coldest winters, how the water tasted of minerals that seemed to ease any ailment. As evening settled over the mission, Martha served a simple meal of cornbread and beans. The children ate quickly before being ushered to their sleeping quarters upstairs. In the quiet that followed, Jonas and Martha exchanged a long look. "Tell her," Jonas said finally. Martha spread a rough map across the table. "The spring we need, your mother's spring, lies just beyond Maverick Darnell's claim line." Her finger traced a boundary marked in faded ink. "Here, on Darnell land." Ella's hands began to shake. The thought of returning, of facing her father's rage again, made her throat close with fear. She remembered the sting of his palm, the hatred in his eyes as he'd struck her in the church. "I can't," she whispered. "He'll kill me if I go back." Ephraim's hand covered hers on the table, warm and calloused. "Then we face him together," he said, his quiet voice carrying iron certainty. "All of us." Owen nodded grimly from his place by the fire. "Man's got no right to keep water from children, kin or no kin." A knock at the door startled them all. Martha rose to answer it, returning moments later with a sealed letter. Her expression had grown grave. "Express rider just delivered this," she said, handing the paper to Jonas. "From the sheriff's office in Clear Creek." Jonas broke the seal, his face darkening as he read. "They've issued a notice," he said finally, "declaring Ella a runaway under—" He paused, jaw tightening. "Under immoral suspicion." The room fell silent except for the crack and pop of the fire. Ella felt the world spinning around her, Ephraim's hand on hers the only anchor holding her steady. "That's a lie," Owen growled. "We all know it's a lie." "Truth matters little in legal notices," Martha said quietly. "They've given the law a shape to hunt her with." Ella stared at the letter in Jonas's hands, thinking of Timothy's fevered breathing upstairs, of the empty barrels and thirsty children. She thought of her mother's final words about the spring. "Water finds its own way, child. Like grace, it flows where it's needed most." "How long?" she asked, forcing strength into her voice. "How long before the children start dying without water?" Martha's face softened with sorrow. Some are already sick, without clean water for medicines. She shook her head. Days, maybe. A week at most. Ella straightened her shoulders, though her hands still trembled beneath Ephraim's. Then we have no choice. We'll have to face my father, and whatever law he's turned against me. Not alone, Ephraim said again, his grip tightening gently on her fingers. Never alone. The fire cast long shadows across the mission house walls as they began to plan, their voices low and determined. Outside, snow started falling again, soft and steady, covering their tracks from the mountain pass. But there would be no hiding the path ahead, only facing it together, with prayer and purpose, carrying the weight of young lives in need of grace's flow. Morning sunlight glinted off fresh snow as 3 riders approached the town of Clear Creek. Ella sat straight-backed on her borrowed mule between Ephraim and Jonas, though her heart fluttered like a trapped bird. The familiar storefronts and church steeple brought back memories of Sunday's shame, making her fingers tighten on the reins. "Remember," Jonas said softly, "the Lord stands with the righteous. You're doing this for those children." Ephraim guided his horse closer to her mule. "We're right beside you, Miss Ella." The clip-clop of hooves on packed snow drew attention as they rode down Main Street. Townsfolk paused in their morning errands, faces turning to stare. Ella heard the whispers start, spreading like wildfire from the general store to the telegraph office. "That's Maverick's girl. The one who ran off. Shameless, showing her face here." Ella's chin trembled, but she kept it lifted. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Sometimes doing right means walking through fire, child." The weight of the spring deed copy in her coat pocket gave her courage. They dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, where Deputy Turner had already stepped onto the boardwalk. His young face showed discomfort as he held up a hand. "Miss Darnell," he said, "Sheriff Watson's expecting you." Inside, Sheriff Watson sat behind his desk, gray mustache bristling as he studied them. His weathered face showed neither welcome nor hostility, just the careful neutrality of a man used to standing between feuding parties. "Young lady," he said, "your father's filed papers declaring you a runaway. Claims you've brought shame on the family name." He paused, eyes sharp. "Best thing would be to go home quiet-like, make amends." Ella's voice quavered but held firm. "I cannot, Sheriff. Not while children are dying of thirst at Bitter Springs Mission." "We have proof," Jonas added, "that the spring those orphans need belonged to Margaret Darnell. Her daughter has legal claim." The sheriff's reply was cut short by a commotion outside. Heavy boots thundered on the boardwalk, and the office door burst open. Maverick Darnell stood in the doorway, face flushed with drink despite the early hour, his cold eyes fixed on Ella. "So you've come crawling back," he sneered. "Good, time to come. Home, and spare what's left of our name." The smell of whiskey reached them. Ella took a step backward, bumping into Ephraim's solid presence. Her father's gaze shifted to the half-Cherokee blacksmith, hatred flaring. "This the breed you've taken up with?" Maverick spat. "No wonder you've forgotten your raising." "Mr. Darnell," the sheriff warned, "mind your tongue in my office." Ella found her voice, though it shook. "I'm not coming home, Father. Mother's spring belongs to me now, and those children need water." "You're no daughter of mine," Maverick lurched forward, face twisted. "You're dead to me, just like your faithless mother." Ephraim moved faster than thought, stepping between Ella and her father. He said nothing, but his stance was immovable as mountain stone. Jonas quickly pulled the deed copy from Ella's coat. "Sheriff," Jonas said, spreading the paper on the desk, "this copy shows Margaret Darnell's ownership of the spring, dated 1868. By law, it passed to her daughter on death. Sheriff Watson studied the document, ignoring Maverick's continued cursing. His finger traced the official seal, the signatures of witnesses. "This appears legitimate," he said finally. "We'll need to hold a proper hearing. Compare it to county records." He looked up at Maverick. "Until then, that spring's ownership is in dispute. No one touches it." "That paper's worthless," Maverick shouted. "Margaret had no right to leave anything to this ungrateful—" "That's enough!" The sheriff's voice cracked like a whip. "This gets settled legal and proper a week from today. Until then," he fixed Maverick with a hard stare, "you keep your distance from your daughter and those mission folks. Clear?" Maverick's face went dark with rage. He jabbed a finger at Ella. "You think you can steal my land? Hide behind this half-breed and preacher?" He backed toward the door. "I'll see you all burn before I let that spring go to mongrel orphans." The door slammed behind him. Through the window, they watched him stagger toward the livery, shouting curses that made passing women cover their ears. Ella's legs gave way. She sank onto a bench, trembling. Ephraim's hand found her shoulder, steady and warm. "A week," the sheriff said more gently. 10 o'clock next Friday. Bring your proof and witnesses." He looked at Ella. "You got somewhere safe to stay?" "The mission," Jonas answered. "Owen McLeod's standing guard." Sheriff Watson nodded. "McLeod's solid. Still, watch yourselves on the ride back. Man, that drunk and angry might try something foolish." They left the office into bright midday sun. Main Street had grown crowded with onlookers, though people stepped back as they passed. Ella felt their stares like physical weight, but kept her head high. Near their horses, Mrs. Whitaker from the Mercantile hurried over. She pressed a paper-wrapped package into Ella's hands. "Hardtack and dried apples," she whispered. "For them orphan children. Your mama, she was always kind to mine when times were lean." Ella's eyes filled. "Thank you, ma'am." Others stepped forward, the cooper's wife with a small sack of cornmeal, the telegraph operator's daughter with a bundle of warm socks, small gifts offered quietly, with murmured words of encouragement. "Your mother was a good woman. Those poor children. God bless you, girl." Ephraim helped Ella mount, passing up the precious packages. His dark eyes held pride as he looked at her. "Ready?" he asked softly. Ella nodded, squaring her shoulders. The sun had begun its westward slide, and the mission children would be waiting. She touched the deed copy in her pocket, feeling closer to her mother than she had in years. "Let's ride," she said. They left town at a steady walk, ignoring the few hostile mutters from the saloon steps. Behind them, the church bell tolled noon, the same bell that had marked her shame days ago. But this time, Ella rode toward purpose instead of despair, with friends beside her and truth to light the way. The mission's main room buzzed with quiet activity as afternoon light filtered through frost-etched windows. Children of various ages worked together, stringing pine boughs into makeshift insulation for the drafty walls. The sweet scent of fresh-cut evergreen mixed with wood smoke from the cooking hearth. Ella stood at the well-worn table, her arms aching pleasantly as she worked the heavy stone grinding wheel. Cornmeal sifted through her fingers like golden sand. Nearby, 8-year-old Sarah, with her father's Cherokee features and her mother's blue eyes, watched intently. "May I try?" Sarah asked, reaching toward the grinding stone. "Of course, little one." Ella guided the child's small hands. "Steady now. Feel the rhythm?" Together they worked the coarse corn into meal, Sarah's face bright with accomplishment. Other children drifted over, drawn by Ella's gentle presence. Soon she had 5 eager helpers, taking turns at the grinding wheel. "Miss Ella," piped up Tommy, the youngest at 6 years old, Could you sing that song again? The one about the fountain?" Ella smiled, remembering how her mother had taught her the same hymn while doing this very task. She began softly, "Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace." One by one, young voices joined in. The simple melody filled the room, rising above the scrape of the grinding wheel and the rustle of pine boughs. Even the older children, trying so hard to seem grown, hummed along. From his place by the doorway where he mended a broken chair, Ephraim watched. His hands stilled on the wood as he observed Ella's patient teaching, her quiet joy in the children's company. The afternoon light caught the silver threading her dark hair, and something in his chest tightened. Here was strength of a different kind than he'd known, not in muscle or steel, but in gentle persistence and unshakable faith. When darkness fell, Martha Pike shooed the children to their pallets, tucking them in with extra blankets against the bitter cold. Ella helped serve the last mugs of thin broth, making sure each child had their fair share. In the relative quiet that followed, Ephraim retreated to his makeshift forge in the lean-to workshop. He pulled something from his pocket, a twisted silver ring he'd found among Ella's few possessions, dropped during their hasty flight from town. Her mother's ring, he'd learned, bent and tarnished by years of hard work. Working by lamplight, he carefully melted down the old silver, adding a bit of his own stock to strengthen it. His hands moved with practiced precision as he shaped the molten metal, smaller and more delicate than his usual work with horseshoes and wagon parts. With his finest tools, he etched a single word into the band: redeemed. Inside, Jonas gathered Ella, Martha, and Owen around the cooking hearth for a council. His weathered face was grave in the firelight. "Maverick won't take this lying down," he warned. "A man like that, cornered and drinking, he's liable to try force before the hearing." Owen nodded grimly. "I've posted watches. Got my rifle cleaned, too." "Violence begets violence," Martha cautioned. "We must be wise as serpents but harmless as doves." "The children come first," Ella said firmly. "Whatever happens, they need water." Jonas squeezed her shoulder. "You've got your mother's backbone, girl. Margaret would be proud." Later, unable to sleep, Ella stood at the window of her small room. Moonlight transformed the snow-covered valley into something otherworldly. Crystal flakes drifted down, catching the light like falling stars. The pristine blanket glittered, as though marked by countless tiny footprints. Angel tracks, her mother would have said, evidence of heaven's constant watch. Ella pressed her forehead to the cold glass. "Lord," she whispered, "give me strength to see this through, not for my sake, but for these little ones who need your living water." Morning broke clear and sharp. Ella was helping Martha with breakfast when a rider approached the mission. Her heart stuttered as she recognized Eldon Haskett's proper posture, his preacher's blacks stark against the snow. "I'll handle this," Jonas said, moving to intercept his fellow minister at the door. But Eldon had already dismounted, removing his hat with calculated humility. "Brother Pike," he called, "I come in Christian charity, seeking reconciliation." Ephraim appeared silently at Ella's side as Eldon entered. The preacher's son's eyes flickered between them, a muscle tightening in his jaw. "Sister Ella," he said, his voice smooth as honey over stone, "my heart has been heavy with concern for your soul. These good people may not know the full extent of your situation." "We know enough," Ephraim said quietly. Eldon raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "I come offering forgiveness, dear sister. Simply renounce these fabrications about your mother's spring. Admit your previous indiscretions, and all can be made right. You can return to the fold, properly penitent." The room grew very still. Ella felt the weight of every eye. Jonas's concerned gaze, Martha's protective glare, Ephraim's steady presence at her shoulder. Behind Eldon, several children peeked around the doorframe, watching. 6 days ago, his words would have crushed her. But something had changed in the days since she'd fled into the storm. God's grace, she realized, worked in unexpected ways, through 3 riders on a snowy ridge, through children's trust, through a blacksmith's quiet strength. Ella straightened her spine, meeting Eldon's gaze directly. "I have nothing to confess, Mr. Haskett. We both know the truth of who spoke falsely that day." "You dare—" Color flooded his face. "I dare speak truth," she said calmly. "As God is my witness, I have done nothing to shame my mother's memory. These children need water, and that spring was her gift to me. I won't renounce either truth." "You ungrateful?" Eldon's mask of piety cracked. "After I offered to restore you, despite your obvious guilt with that half-breed—" "That's enough." Jonas's voice cracked like a whip. "You've said your piece, Brother Haskett. Now I suggest you leave." Eldon's face twisted. He jammed his hat back on, backing towards the door. "You'll regret this defiance," he muttered. "You and these mongrel brats both." The door slammed behind him. Through the window, they watched him mount and ride away, his straight back rigid with fury. Ella's hands trembled, but her voice was steady as she turned to the children. "Who's ready for their reading lesson?" Sarah darted forward to hug her waist. One by one, the others emerged from hiding, gathering around her like chicks to a mother hen. She gathered them close, breathing in their trust and innocence. Over their heads, her eyes met Ephraim's. His quiet pride warmed her more than any fire could. Later, she would find a small package on her pillow, a silver ring, newly forged, inscribed with a promise of restoration. But for now, she simply held her charges close and began the day's lessons, her mother's hymn humming in her heart. 3 days passed like molasses in winter. The mission settled into an uneasy rhythm, children's laughter mixing with worried glances between the adults. Ella taught her lessons under the threadbare blankets strung up for warmth, trying to keep spirits high despite their dwindling water supply. The clatter of hooves broke the morning quiet. Martha Pike looked up from her mending, her face drawn. "Company coming?" Ella's heart sank as she recognized the 3 riders approaching through the crystalline morning air. Her father sat straight-backed on his bay mare, flanked by Eldon Haskett and a stranger in a city suit. The stranger's horse picked its way carefully through the snow, clearly unused to mountain paths. "That's Gerald Webster," Jonas muttered, coming to stand beside her. "Government surveyor from Denver. Question is, what's he doing riding with your father?" Ephraim appeared silently at Ella's other shoulder, his presence steady as mountain stone. Owen emerged from the stable, casually checking his rifle before leaning it against the porch post. The riders dismounted, Maverick's boots crunching in the snow. His eyes were fever bright, but his stance was steady, something worse than drink putting that dangerous gleam in his gaze. "Sheriff's already been notified," Maverick announced without preamble. "Thought you ought to hear it first, though, seeing as you're squatting on railroad property now." "What nonsense is this?" Martha demanded, setting aside her mending. The surveyor, Webster, cleared his throat. He pulled a document from his leather satchel, unfolding it with careful precision. "I have here a properly executed bill of sale, dated 6 months ago, transferring water rights and adjacent property from Margaret Darnell's estate to the Colorado Northern Railroad Company." "That's impossible," Ella whispered. Her mother had been dead for 3 years, the spring deed safely passed to her in the will. "See for yourself." Webster held out the paper. Jonas took it, studying the elaborate letterhead and official stamps. His face darkened. This signature, Margaret Darnell's mark, it's dated last summer. A dead woman's signature? Owen's voice dripped contempt. Mighty convenient timing. Eldon stepped forward, all proper concern. The law must respect properly filed documents, Brother Pike. The railroad has plans for that watershed. Progress can't be halted for sentiment. Or orphans. Martha's normally gentle voice could have frozen water. The sheriff's arrival interrupted further argument. He dismounted heavily, looking uncomfortable. Got the telegram from the railroad's lawyers in Denver. Until we can verify these competing claims, I've got to suspend next week's hearing. But the children, Ella protested. They need water now. Law's the law, miss. The sheriff wouldn't meet her eyes. Railroad's within their rights to demand you all clear out pending resolution. Ella watched helplessly as Martha gathered the children inside, their small faces pressed against frosted window panes. Sarah, the oldest at 12, tried to comfort the younger ones, but their sniffles carried across the yard. How much? Ephraim's quiet voice cut through the morning air. How much did the railroad pay you, Maverick? Her father's face flushed dark red. You watch your mouth, half-breed. I did what any businessman would do, sold to the highest bidder. You sold what wasn't yours to sell, Ella said. The words came out stronger than she expected, steam clouding around them in the cold. Mother wanted that spring to help people, not line railroad pockets. Your mother's dead, Maverick snapped. And you're no daughter of mine, siding with mongrels and street rats over your own blood. Ephraim's hand found Ella's shoulder, steadying her. She drew strength from his touch, refusing to flinch from her father's hatred. The sheriff cleared his throat. You'll have 3 days to make arrangements. I'm sorry, folks, but until this gets sorted in Denver. We understand, Jonas said heavily. The law must take its course. The group dispersed, Webster and the sheriff riding back to town, Maverick and Eldon lingering to watch the mission's obvious distress. Ella caught the satisfied smirk that passed between them before they too mounted up. Inside, chaos reigned. Little Tommy clung to Martha's skirts, sobbing. I don't want to leave! This is home! Hush now, Martha soothed, though her own eyes glistened. The Lord provides, remember? We just have to trust His timing. Ella helped gather the children for their afternoon lessons, but her mind churned. Something about the deed nagged at her, beyond the impossible signature. The railroad's sudden interest, her father's unexpected sophistication in legal matters. As evening fell, she found herself by the cook fire, staring into the flames. Ephraim settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Your father's not clever enough to forge official documents, he said quietly. No. Ella wrapped her arms around her knees. But Eldon is. His father taught him all about land deeds and contracts, training him to be deputy clerk someday. Ephraim nodded. Owen's been watching them. Says they met the railroad agent at the saloon 3 nights ago. Lot of whiskey flowing, lot of papers changing hands. If we could prove it, Ella's voice trailed off. We will. Ephraim's hand covered hers briefly, warm and calloused. I promise you, Ella. We'll find a way to save your mother's spring, and these children's home. Owen materialized from the darkness, his usual stoic expression brightened by grim satisfaction. Reckon I might help with that proving part, he said, settling on a log across the fire. Been following that railroad man, Thompson. He's not nearly as careful as he thinks, especially after a few drinks. What did you learn? Ella leaned forward. Overheard him bragging to the barkeep. Seems your father was well paid in whiskey to make that sale. A sale Thompson claims happened just last week, not 6 months ago like that fancy paper says. Hope flickered in Ella's chest. Can you testify to hearing that? Owen's weathered face creased in a rare smile. Better. Thompson's still at the saloon, drinking and running his mouth. Reckon if someone was to send the sheriff over right now. Ephraim stood. I'll fetch him. You two stay here. Keep the children calm if they wake. Be careful, Ella whispered. His fingers brushed her shoulder once more before he disappeared into the night. She stared after him, heart pounding with more than just worry about the forged deed. Owen watched her with knowing eyes across the fire. He's a good man, the old scout said quietly. Don't let anyone tell you different because of his blood. Best tracker and metalsmith I've known, and the most honest. Ella nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. Together they waited by the dying fire, watching the moon rise over the snow-covered valley. Somewhere in town, she knew, truth was finally coming to light. She could only pray it would be enough to save the mission, and the future she was starting to imagine might be possible, if God and justice prevailed. The flames crackled low, casting dancing shadows as they maintained their vigil. Behind them, the mission house creaked and settled, sheltering its precious charges for at least one more night. Ella's mother's hymn rose unbidden to her lips, a quiet defiance against the darkness. Here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I come. Dawn painted the eastern sky in watercolor stripes of pink and gold as Ephraim and Owen prepared their horses for the ride to Silverton. The mission yard was quiet, except for the soft nickering of horses and the crunch of frozen snow beneath boots. Ella stood at the hitching post, wrapping a fresh bandage around Ephraim's left hand, where he'd scraped it helping repair the mission's roof. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her movements were sure. It's 15 miles to Silverton, Owen said, checking his saddlebags. Should make it there by mid-morning if we push hard. Ephraim flexed his bandaged hand. Thank you, he said softly to Ella. Their eyes met briefly before he turned to mount his horse. Be careful, she whispered. Father was in a rage last night at the saloon. The sheriff had to lock him up to sleep it off. We'll keep our eyes open, Owen assured her, swinging into his saddle. Jonas will watch over things here. As if summoned by his name, Jonas emerged from the mission house, prayer book tucked under his arm. The children are gathering for morning devotions, he said. We'll keep faith while you seek truth. The two riders touched their hat brims in farewell and urged their horses towards the trail. Ella watched until they disappeared around the bend, then hurried inside at the sound of coughing. In the dormitory, young Benji Yazzie huddled beneath 3 blankets, his dark eyes glassy with fever. At 8 years old, he was one of the mission's youngest charges, rescued from a refugee camp after his parents died in the conflicts 2 years prior. How is he? Ella asked Martha, who sat beside the boy's cot. Fever's higher, Martha said grimly. The dry air and cold aren't helping his lungs. Ella soaked a cloth in cool water and placed it on Benji's forehead. He stirred, mumbling something in Navajo. Shh, she soothed. You're safe here. His small hand found hers. Sing? He whispered in English. Ella began the hymn she'd taught the children, her voice soft but clear. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. In the main room, Jonas gathered the other children for prayers. Their voices joined hers, creating a harmony that seemed to settle Benji. His breathing eased slightly as he drifted back to sleep. The morning passed slowly. Ella divided her time between tending Benji and helping Martha with lessons. Around noon, the telegraph operator's boy came running up the path, waving a yellow paper. Message from Silverton, he called out. Jonas met him at the door, pressing a penny into his hand before unfolding the telegram. His eyes scanned the text, and a smile broke across his weathered face. "The notary, William Hayes, confirms he never witnessed any sale of the Spring property," Jonas announced. "Says he's been in Denver since Christmas with a broken leg. Couldn't have signed anything here 6 months ago or last week." "Praise God," Martha breathed. Jonas was already writing a reply. "I'm requesting an emergency hearing with Judge Morton. With Hayes' testimony and Owen's evidence about Thompson's confession, we can prove the fraud." "Will the judge listen?" Ella asked. "Morton's a fair man. He'll want to hear all sides, but he won't ignore clear evidence of forgery." The afternoon brought more news, this time from the sheriff's deputy. Maverick had been released from the jail cell and immediately headed for the saloon, shouting about losing everything to a lying girl. The deputy warned them to be cautious. "He's drinking himself mad," the young lawman said apologetically. "Sheriff's keeping an eye on him, but—" "Thank you for the warning," Jonas said gravely. As sunset approached, Ephraim and Owen returned, their horses looking worn from hard riding. "Hayes is willing to testify," Ephraim reported. "He's arranging transport to be here by week's end." "How's the boy?" Owen asked, noticing Ella's worried expression. "Worse," she admitted. "The fever won't break." Ephraim followed her to the dormitory. Benji lay still and small in his cot, cheeks flushed with fever. When Ephraim touched his forehead, the boy's eyes fluttered open. "Uncle," he whispered in Navajo, using the respectful term for an older male relative. "Rest, little brother," Ephraim replied in the same language. "We're watching over you." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the first flakes of new snow. The mission group gathered in the main room after the children were settled for the night. Martha brought coffee while Jonas spread out the various documents and telegrams on the table. "The evidence is clear," he said, "but Maverick and his allies won't give up easily. They've invested too much in this scheme." "Thompson's probably halfway to Denver by now," Owen added. "Man lit out of the saloon like his coat was on fire when he heard Hayes was coming to testify." A particularly strong gust rattled the windows. From the dormitory came the sound of Benji coughing. Ella rose to check on him, but Martha waved her back. "I'll go. You need to hear this planning." The remaining 4 sat in silence for a moment, listening to the wind moan around the eaves. Finally, Jonas spoke. "We should pray," he said simply. They joined hands around the table. Jonas's steady voice rose above the storm. "Lord, we seek your wisdom and protection. Guide Judge Morton's heart toward justice. Shield these children from harm. Grant healing to young Benji, and help us face whatever trials tomorrow brings with courage and faith." "Amen," they whispered together. The night deepened. They took turns watching, both over Benji and for any approach along the mission road. Ella found herself unable to sleep, sitting by the dormitory window with her mother's Bible open in her lap. Ephraim brought her a cup of coffee near midnight. "You should rest," he said softly. "I keep thinking about Father," she admitted. "All those years of bitterness after Mother died, drinking away his pain. But I never thought he'd go this far." "Grief does strange things to a man's heart," Ephraim said. "Makes him forget who he really is." "Who was he? I barely remember anymore." "Your mother wouldn't have loved a completely hard man. There must have been goodness in him once." Ella touched the worn Bible cover. "She always said he was kind before everything went wrong. She never stopped praying for him, even at the end." From his cot, Benji stirred restlessly. Ella dabbed his forehead with a cool cloth while Ephraim built up the dormitory's small stove. Through the window, they could see Jonas walking the mission yard, his lantern a lonely flame in the darkness. Owen's shadow moved along the stable wall as he checked the horses. The snow fell harder, muffling all sound except the wind and Benji's labored breathing. "We'll hold vigil together," Ephraim said, settling into a chair near Ella's. Prayer is stronger when shared. She nodded, too touched for words. As the night hours crept past, they took turns reading psalms aloud, their quiet voices a bulwark against the storm's fury and whatever danger tomorrow might bring. The darkness before dawn found them all gathered again in the main room: Ella, Ephraim, Owen, Jonas, and Martha. They had moved Benji's cot closer to the stove, where they could watch over him together. "Oh, Grace," they sang softly, mindful of the sleeping children. "How sweet the sound! That saved a wretch like me." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the mission house, faith held firm against fear, and hope refused to yield to darkness. Morning broke cold and clear over the town, the storm's fury spent. Townsfolk filed into the cramped hall, their boots tracking snow across worn floorboards. The judge's temporary bench, 2 tables pushed together, faced rows of mismatched chairs filled with whispering citizens. Ella stood near the front, her hands clasped tight to stop their trembling. The weight of so many eyes pressed against her back, but she forced herself to stand straight. Ephraim's solid presence beside her helped steady her nerves. Judge Morton entered, his black robes dusty from travel. He was younger than Ella, expected, with keen eyes that missed nothing as he surveyed the crowded room. The bailiff called everyone to order, and silence fell. "We're here regarding ownership of the spring property in Section 23, Morton announced, shuffling through papers. "Currently claimed by both Maverick Darnell and his daughter Ella, through inheritance from Margaret Darnell. Let's proceed with evidence." Ephraim stepped forward first, his voice clear and steady. "Your Honor, I present this telegram from William Hayes, Notary Public in Silverton." He handed over the yellow paper. Hayes confirms he never witnessed any sale of the spring property to the railroad, as claimed in their document. He's been in Denver since December with a broken leg. The judge read carefully, nodding. "And this alleged sale was supposedly witnessed when?" "Last week, Your Honor, and again supposedly 6 months ago." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The judge held up his hand for silence. Jonas Pike rose next, Margaret's worn Bible cradled in his hands. "Your Honor, I have further evidence of Mrs. Darnell's intentions for the spring." He opened to a marked page where a deed was tucked. "This is the original spring deed, signed and witnessed properly 15 years ago. In the margin, Margaret wrote this verse: 'The Lord redeemeth the soul of his servants.'" He passed the Bible forward. The judge examined the deed, then read the careful script in the margin. "And you can verify this is Margaret Darnell's handwriting?" "Yes, sir." Jonas produced several letters. "These are correspondences between Margaret and my sister Martha at the mission. The handwriting matches exactly." The door banged open, startling everyone. Maverick Darnell lurched in, his face flushed and eyes wild. He reeked of whiskey even from across the room. "This is all lies!" he shouted, stumbling forward. "That spring's mine. Been Darnell land since before that girl was born?" "Mr. Darnell," the judge said sharply, "take a seat or be removed." "Ain't taking orders from no jumped-up circuit rider." Maverick spat on the floor. "That spring belongs to me and the railroad now. Got papers to prove it?" "Papers proven to be forged," Morton replied coldly. "Perhaps you'd like to explain how a notary in Denver managed to witness your signature in 2 different months?" Maverick's face darkened. "You're all against me, just like her." He jabbed a finger toward Ella. "Ungrateful child, stealing her father's property." "It was Mother's property," Ella said quietly, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "She meant it for good, to help people, not to be sold for whiskey money." "You shut your mouth!" Maverick lunged forward, but the bailiff caught his arm. "That's enough," Judge Morton commanded. "Mr. Darnell, you will be seated and silent, or you will be jailed for contempt." He waited until Maverick slumped into a chair, glaring. Now then, I've reviewed all evidence presented, including the original deed, witnesses, statements, and the telegram from Mr. Hayes. The room held its breath as Morton shuffled his papers one final time. The law is clear in this matter. Margaret Darnell's spring deed was properly executed and recorded. Upon her death, ownership passed to her heir, her daughter, Ella Darnell. The alleged sale to the railroad is proven fraudulent. He fixed Maverick with a stern look. Any further attempts to contest this ruling will be met with severe consequences. The spring property is hereby legally restored to Ella Darnell, sole heir of Margaret Darnell. For a moment, perfect silence held. Then someone began to clap. Others joined in until applause filled the hall. Ella swayed slightly, overwhelmed by relief and vindication. Ephraim's warm hand found hers, squeezing gently. Outside, children's voices raised in celebration. The mission orphans had gathered to await the verdict, and now their cheers floated through the windows. Ella felt tears spill down her cheeks. Not tears of shame this time, but of joy and gratitude. "Order," the judge called, though he was smiling slightly. "Miss Darnell, you are free to use and dispose of your property as you see fit. Court is adjourned." People pressed forward to congratulate her. Martha Pike hugged her tight, whispering, "Your mother would be so proud." Jonas clasped her shoulder, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Through the crowd, Ella saw her father being led away by the bailiff, his shoulders slumped in defeat. For a moment, their eyes met. The hatred there had burned out, leaving only emptiness. She felt a sudden pang of pity. He looked old and lost, a man who had destroyed everything he once held dear. But that was a healing for another day. Right now, the mission children were pouring inside, surrounding her with their joy. Little Benji, still weak but recovering, tugged at her skirt until she lifted him up. "Does this mean we can stay?" he asked in his raspy voice. "Yes," she told him, holding him close. "The spring will give us all the water we need. No one will have to leave." More townspeople approached to shake her hand or offer quiet words of support. Even old Mrs. Whitaker, who had turned away from her in church that terrible day, came to mumble an awkward apology. Ella accepted it graciously, feeling the last weight of shame fall away from her heart. Ephraim stayed close through it all, a steady presence at her side. When she glanced up at him, his dark eyes held such pride and tenderness that her heart skipped. "You did it," he said softly. She shook her head. "We did it, all of us together." She looked around at the gathering, Jonas and Martha, the children, the townsfolk who had finally chosen truth over gossip. "God did it, really. He made a way when there seemed to be none." "Amen to that," Jonas said, joining them. "Shall we head back to the mission? Martha's got a celebration dinner planned." They walked out into the bright winter morning, the children skipping ahead through the snow. The sun caught the ice crystals, making them sparkle like diamonds. Ella breathed deeply, tasting freedom in the crisp air. For the first time since that Sunday when her world shattered, she felt truly at peace. The truth had finally prevailed. Her mother's spring would serve its intended purpose, giving life and hope to those in need. And she had found a new family, bound together by love and faith stronger than blood. As they neared the mission, the children began singing one of the hymns she had taught them. Their sweet voices carried on the wind. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." Ephraim's hand found hers again as they walked. She held on tight, grateful for his quiet strength, for all the ways God had turned her sorrow into joy. The mission beckoned ahead, smoke rising cheerfully from its chimney. Martha had the door open, welcome spilling out in lamplight and warmth. They were home. Evening settled soft and peaceful over Red Willow Mission. Inside the main hall, lamplight glowed warm against rough-hewn walls as voices lifted in song. Ella sat at the battered piano, her fingers moving across yellowed keys, while 36 voices joined in, sweet hour of prayer. The victory celebration had turned into an impromptu hymn service, with townsfolk and children alike crowded onto benches and floor space. Martha Pike moved between clusters of people, passing out cups of hot cider and plates of cornbread. The aroma of victory supper still lingered, rabbit stew and dried apple pie. Little Benji curled against Ella's side on the piano bench, his small voice clear and pure on the high notes. "Another?" called Sarah, one of the older girls, when the hymn ended. "Please, Miss Ella, teach us a new one." Ella smiled, turning pages in the worn hymnal. "How about Rock of Ages? My mother taught me this one when I was just your age." Outside in the growing dark, Maverick Darnell leaned against the mission's barn wall, a half-empty whiskey bottle dangling from his fingers. The music drifted out to mock him, his dead wife's favorite hymns sung by the daughter who'd betrayed him. His bleary gaze fixed on the warm windows, hatred and jealousy twisting in his gut. "Think you're better than your own blood now," he muttered, taking another burning swallow. "Prancing around with those mission folk like you own the place." The bottle shook in his trembling hand. Inside, Ephraim's deep voice carried the bass line while Jonas led the verses. Maverick watched their shadows move across the windows. His daughter stood among them, teaching their brats to sing Margaret's songs. The thought made him sick with rage. He fumbled with the lantern at his feet, meaning to light his way to the saloon. But his hands wouldn't steady. The lantern tipped, spilling kerosene across dry hay strewn near the barn door. Flames licked up instantly, hungry and bright. Maverick stumbled back, squinting at the growing fire. He ought to call. Out, he knew distantly. Ought to raise the alarm. Instead, he watched the flames climb the weathered boards, spreading with terrifying speed. Inside, Owen McLeod was the first to smell smoke. He rose from his seat near the door, nostrils flaring. "Fire!" he shouted, just as orange light began to flicker through the windows. Chaos erupted. Martha herded the smallest children towards the front door, while Jonas and Ephraim rushed to grab water buckets. Ella's hands froze on the piano keys as screams replaced singing. "Everyone out!" Owen bellowed. "Stay together! Head for the creek!" People poured from the building into the snowy yard. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames leaping to catch the mission's rear wall. Heat blistered the night air. Ella did a frantic head count as children streamed past her. "Where's Tommy? And Peter?" The 2 8-year-old boys were missing from their usual group. "Still inside!" Sarah cried, pointing to the mission's now burning back rooms. "They were playing marbles in the kitchen." Before anyone could stop him, Owen crashed through the door and vanished into the smoke-filled building. Ella screamed his name, starting forward, but Ephraim caught her arms. "Let him work!" he shouted over the fire's roar. "Help get these children to safety!" Through tears and smoke, Ella glimpsed a dark figure staggering away from the barn, her father fleeing into the woods. Understanding hit her like a physical blow. This was his doing, his final revenge. Minutes stretched like hours as they waited, praying. Then Owen burst through a window, a boy tucked under each arm. His shirt smoldered, his face and hands angry red with burns. He stumbled to his knees in the snow, gasping. "Owen!" Ella ran to help ease the boys down. Tommy and Peter were conscious but coughing hard, their faces streaked with soot. Martha rushed to check them over while Jonas and Ephraim helped Owen away from the building's intense heat. Snow began to fall as they watched the barn collapse in a shower of sparks. The mission's back wall was fully involved now, flames consuming the kitchen and spreading rapidly. There was no hope of saving the building. "Everyone accounted for?" Owen rasped, trying to sit up despite his burns. "Yes," Martha assured him, voice breaking. "Thanks to you, everyone's safe." But the cost was devastating. As the snow fell harder, it hissed against hot timbers and muted the crackle of destruction. Their home, their sanctuary, was burning to the ground. The children huddled together, crying quietly while adults spoke in shocked whispers. Dawn found them sheltering in the church, the only building large enough to hold them all. Owen lay on a pallet near the altar, fever setting in despite Martha's careful treatment of his burns. The children slept fitfully on blankets in the pews, while others kept vigil. Ella sat beside Owen, dabbing his hot forehead with a cool cloth. Her eyes were hollow with exhaustion and guilt. If she hadn't pushed for the spring, if she'd just given in to her father's demands. But Owen's hand caught hers, as if reading her thoughts. "Don't," he whispered hoarsely. "Don't take his sin on yourself." "But the children, they're home," her voice broke. "We'll rebuild." Owen's grip tightened despite his burned palm. "Evil don't win just by burning things down." Ella bowed her head, tears falling. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the blackened ruins of their celebration in silent white. Somewhere in the woods, her father was alone with his hatred. She prayed for him, though it hurt her heart to do so. Near the church door, Ephraim and Jonas conferred quietly with the sheriff, who had arrived to investigate. They already knew the truth, had found Maverick's dropped whiskey bottle near the barn's remains, but no one spoke it aloud yet. That reckoning would come later. For now, they focused on survival. Martha organized the women to cook breakfast in the church kitchen. The children slowly stirred, asking sleepy questions about their lost toys and books. Ella moved between them, offering comfort, while watching Owen's fever rise despite their best efforts. The mission lay in ashes. Owen was badly hurt, and her father was lost to darkness. Yet as morning light filtered through the church windows, Ella felt a strange calm beneath her grief. They were all still here, still together. God's grace had preserved their lives, if not their walls. She returned to Owen's side, taking up her vigil again. His feverish muttering had ceased, but his skin burned under her touch. Martha brought cool water and fresh bandages, her face drawn with worry. "We should send for the doctor from Silver Creek," she said softly. Ella nodded, watching Owen's labored breathing. The cost of her father's rage lay heavy on this good man who had risked everything to save 2 children. Yet even now, she couldn't bring herself to hate Maverick. There was only a deep, aching sorrow for what he had become. Outside, the snow fell thicker, erasing tracks and traces. Somewhere in the white silence, a lost soul wandered with his demons. But here within these walls, love and faith still held strong. They would rebuild from these ashes. They would find a way forward together. Owen stirred, his cracked lips moving. Ella leaned close to hear him whisper, sing something." So she did, her quiet voice carrying the old hymn her mother had loved. "Be still, my soul, the Lord is on thy side." Others joined in softly, the music rising like a prayer through the morning light. 3 days crawled past like wounded animals. The mission's blackened bones stood stark against white snow, while men from town helped clear debris and begin rebuilding. Hammer blows echoed across the valley as fresh timber rose to replace what flames had taken. Owen MacLeod lay still as death in the church infirmary, his skin hot beneath Martha's cool compresses. The doctor from Silver Creek had come and gone, leaving medicines and grave warnings about infection. The burns across Owen's back and arms were angry red, weeping despite careful bandaging. Ella moved like a ghost between the church and the construction site, her face drawn and pale. She barely touched the bowls of stew Martha pressed into her hands. At night, she sat vigil beside Owen's cot, watching his chest rise and fall with labored breath. "You need to eat, child," Martha urged, bringing her a slice of fresh bread. "Owen wouldn't want you wasting away." But guilt lay heavy as iron in Ella's stomach. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flames climbing the mission walls, heard children screaming. Her father's hatred had brought this destruction, and in her darkest thoughts, she wondered if it was God's judgment on her own pride. Jonas found her that evening, staring unseeing at her untouched supper. He settled into the pew beside her, his kind face creased with concern. "I know that look," he said softly. "I wore it myself when my Sarah died, thinking somehow I'd earned God's wrath." Ella's hands trembled in her lap. "If I hadn't pushed for the spring, if I'd just gone home when Father demanded, then those children would be dying of thirst instead of sleeping safe tonight," Jonas countered. "Evil done in anger isn't God's will, Ella. It's man's choice." "But he's my father," she whispered, voice breaking. "How can I not feel responsible for what his hatred drove him to do?" Jonas was quiet a moment, watching candlelight flicker across the chapel walls. "You know what Scripture says about praying for our enemies," he said at last. "Have you prayed for Maverick since the fire?" Ella shook her head, shame coloring her cheeks. I haven't known how. Every time I try, I just feel angry and afraid." "Then perhaps that's where healing needs to start." Jonas squeezed her shoulder gently as he stood. "Prayer changes the one praying as much as the one prayed for." He left her alone in the chapel, his words echoing in her mind. Through the windows, she could see fresh snow beginning to fall, covering the scorched earth in clean white. Somewhere out there, her father was alone in the bitter cold, carrying his burning rage like a torch. Slowly, Ella slid from the pew to her knees. The wooden floor was hard beneath her skirts as she bowed her head. For a long time, she couldn't find words. Only hurt and confusion filled her heart. "Lord," she finally whispered, voice trembling in the candle-lit silence. "I don't know how to pray this prayer, but save him. Save my father from himself, from this darkness that's consuming him." Tears slid down her cheeks as she continued. Even if it means taking me instead. Just don't let him die with such hatred in his heart." She didn't hear the soft creak of floorboards, didn't know Ephraim Holt stood in the chapel doorway, arrested by the sight of her bowed figure and the raw faith in her words. His own heart clenched at her willingness to trade her life for her father's soul. Long after Ella had risen and gone to check on Owen, Ephraim remained in the doorway, thinking. He knew the high mountain passes where a man might hide, and where that same man might freeze to death in this weather. The thought of Maverick Darnell dying alone in his bitterness sat ill with him. Through the night, Ephraim wrestled with his decision. By dawn, he was in the stable, saddling his horse. He packed carefully, extra blankets, dried meat, medical supplies. If he found Maverick alive, the man would likely need treatment for exposure. The eastern sky was just beginning to pale when Ephraim led his mount out into the pre-dawn chill. Fresh snow had smoothed away yesterday's tracks, leaving the world clean and new. He checked his rifle was secure in its scabbard, knowing he might need it for more than just hunting game. "You're going after him, aren't you?" He turned to find Ella standing in the stable doorway, a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. Someone needs to, Ephraim answered simply, before the weather turns worse. Ella stepped forward, reaching up to touch his horse's warm neck. He might try to kill you, she said softly. His pride won't bear another defeat. I reckon that's between him and God. Ephraim adjusted his saddle strings, not meeting her worried gaze. But a man shouldn't die alone in the cold, no matter his sins. I heard you last night, he added after a moment. In the chapel. That kind of mercy. It deserves an answer. Color touched Ella's pale cheeks, but she lifted her chin. Then I'll keep praying, for both of you. Ephraim swung into the saddle, gathering his reins. The morning air was sharp with coming snow, and he needed to make good time before the next storm hit. He looked down at Ella's upturned face, seeing not the shamed girl they'd found in the snow, but a woman whose faith had grown strong enough to pray for her persecutor. Your mother would be proud of you, he said quietly. Then he touched his hat brim and turned his horse north, toward the high passes where a lost soul waited to be found. Ella watched until horse and rider disappeared into the gray wilderness. Fresh snow began to fall, soft as mercy, covering his tracks as he rode into the storm-shadowed mountains. She wrapped her arms around herself, whispering a final prayer into the dawn wind. Lord, bring them both home safe. Then she turned back toward the church, where Owen's fever still burned and work waited to be done. They would rebuild what hatred had destroyed. They would keep faith through the long hours until Ephraim returned, with or without her father. But for the first time since the fire, hope flickered in her heart like a small, bright flame that no storm could quench. 3 days of bitter waiting stretched like years. The mission bustled with quiet activity as workers continued repairs, but Ella found herself drawn again and again to the chapel window, searching the snow-laden ridge for any sign of riders. Owen's fever had finally broken that morning. Martha Pike kept him confined to bed, despite his gruff protests, changing his bandages with gentle hands while he complained about being treated like a child. The burns across his back were healing slowly, pink skin beginning to replace angry red. He'll be up and growling at everyone properly in no time, Martha assured Ella with a tired smile. That man's too stubborn to stay down long. The children had settled back into their routines, though they still startled at sudden sounds. Little Benji stuck close to Ella's side, his small hand often finding its way into hers during lessons or meals. His trust helped ease some of the ache in her heart. It was just past noon on the third day when the lookout's shout rang across the yard. Riders coming. 2 riders on the North Trail. Ella's heart leaped into her throat. She hurried outside, skirts gathered against the snow, straining to see through the swirling flakes. Jonas appeared beside her, his normally cheerful face drawn with concern. Through the white veil of winter, 2 figures gradually took shape. Ephraim's broad-shouldered form led the way, his horse picking carefully down the slope. Behind him, slumped in the saddle of a second mount, rode a man Ella barely recognized as her father. Maverick Darnell's proud bearing was gone. He swayed dangerously as Ephraim led his horse into the mission yard, his face gray with exhaustion and cold. Frost rimed his beard, and his clothes hung in frozen tatters. He needs help down, Ephraim called, his own voice rough with weariness. Found him half frozen in a cave up near Eagle's Rest. Been riding double shifts to get him back before the storm hit. Several men hurried forward to help, but Maverick waved them off with a trembling hand. He slid from the saddle on his own, stumbling as his feet hit the ground. For a moment he stood there, swaying, his eyes fixed on Ella's face. Daughter, he whispered, and the word held a lifetime of regret. Then his legs gave way, and he collapsed to his knees in the snow. His shoulders began to shake, and Ella realized with shock that her father was weeping, great, racking sobs that tore from his throat like they might break him apart. "I thought God abandoned me when your mother died," he choked out between breaths. "Couldn't bear to see her smile in your face, hear her voice in your singing. Turned my grief to anger 'cause it hurt less than remembering her love." The mission yard had gone silent except for Maverick's ragged weeping. Ella stood frozen, her heart thundering against her ribs. Then, slowly, she stepped forward through the snow. Each footfall felt heavy with the weight of years, of hurt, of prayers whispered into darkness. She knelt before her father, feeling the cold seep through her skirts. Gently, she placed her hands on his shaking shoulders. The gesture echoed with memory. How many times had her mother done the same for her when she was small and afraid? "He never left either of us, Father," she whispered, her own tears falling now. "Even in our darkest hours, he was there, waiting for us to remember his mercy." Maverick's calloused hands came up to cover hers, clutching like a drowning man finding anchor. "I struck you," he breathed, horror thick in his voice. "My own child. Let that boy spread lies about you, tried to steal your birthright, burned down." His voice broke. "I near killed that good man Owen. How can you even look at me?" "Because I learned about forgiveness," Ella said softly. "From these people who took in a shamed girl and showed her God's love. From the children who trust despite being hurt. From Mother's example." More people had gathered now, Martha leading Owen, who leaned heavily on a crutch but insisted on standing witness. The orphans pressed close to Jonas, wide-eyed at seeing the fierce Mr. Darnell brought so low. Ephraim remained mounted, watching silently from beneath his snow-laden hat brim. Maverick raised his head at last, tears freezing on his weathered cheeks. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he said hoarsely, "but I beg it all the same. From you, from these good people, from God himself if he'll still hear me." Jonas stepped forward then, his Bible in hand. "He hears, brother. He's been waiting for this moment since you first turned away in grief." "The spring," Maverick said suddenly, turning to look at his daughter. "Your mother's spring. It was wrong of me to try to steal it. The children need it more than my pride needs vengeance." As if in answer to his words, a soft gurgling sound rose beneath the snow. The winter-sealed spring, frozen these many weeks, had begun to flow again. Clear water trickled out from under white drifts, catching the pale sunlight like scattered diamonds. Jonas smiled, bending to cup some of the fresh water in his hands. "Seems God's timing is perfect as always," he said. "What better water for a baptism of renewal?" Would you do that?" Maverick asked uncertainly. "After everything?" "The Lord's mercy makes all things new," Jonas replied. He looked to Ella. "If your daughter is willing to stand as witness." "I am," Ella said firmly, helping her father to his feet. His legs trembled, but he stood straight as Jonas read from his Bible and spoke the ancient words of blessing. The spring water was ice cold as it spilled over Maverick's bowed head, but his face shone with something warmer than sunlight as he rose. Ella found herself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in weeks. A weak chuckle from the edge of the crowd drew her attention. Owen had settled onto a bench, his burned back carefully supported, but his eyes twinkled as he watched father and daughter embrace. "About time we heard that laugh again," he said gruffly. "Place hasn't been right without it." Ella's smile widened as she looked around at these people who had become family. Owen with his gruff kindness, Jonas steady as a mountain, Martha's quiet strength, Ephraim still watching from horseback with something soft in his dark eyes. Even the children pressed close, their small faces shining with the simple joy of seeing love triumph over pain. The spring continued to flow, its music a hymn of renewal. Snow fell gentle as grace around them all, covering the last traces of fire's destruction with clean white promise. And in that moment, watching her father's tears turn to wondering joy, Ella understood at last what her mother had meant about living water, how it could heal not just body, but heart and soul as well. Spring brought new life to Red Willow Valley. Warm sunshine melted the last patches of snow, and tender green shoots pushed through dark soil. Near the mission's newly dug well, a dozen children worked alongside Maverick Darnell, their small hands dropping corn kernels into neat furrows. 3 finger widths apart, Maverick instructed gently, so different from the harsh man he'd been. His eyes were clear now, touched with peace instead of whiskey's poison. That's the way. Good planting means good eating come harvest. The spring that had nearly torn their world apart now gushed strong and sweet, feeding both crops and souls. Fresh water sparkled in the wooden troughs, catching morning light like scattered gems. Ella stood watching from the mission steps, her heart full. Ephraim approached quietly, his smith's apron dusty from work. Without ceremony, he took her hand. "I aim to build a forge here," he said softly, "right beside the mission. These children need more than just water and corn. They need to see honest work done with honest hands." He paused, dark eyes meeting hers. "And I need you beside me, if you're willing, as my wife." Jonas, passing with an armload of hymnals, stopped to lay his weathered hands on both their shoulders. "God's timing shows his wisdom," he said, smiling. "This mission needs a family's heart at its center." That Sunday morning, the little church overflowed. Women who had once whispered cruel gossip now dabbed at tears as Ella and her father knelt side by side before the altar, prayers of thanksgiving on their lips. When Ella stood to lead the orphans in her mother's favorite hymn, "Come Thou Fount," the sweet notes rose like living water, washing all clean. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.